In this video, I'll go through the assembly procedure for the Harbor Freight 70-gallon dust collector. Here are the pieces to be assembled as they came out of the box. Of note here is that the motor is just sitting on its bracket. Nothing's assembled. That's just to let the motor sit flat. This is all the hardware that came with it. All the bolts and everything were in their own bag inside of a box. Casters were in a bag. And here's the filter bag and the collection bag. We're going to start off with the casters, the bolts or the screwdriver head, a flat washer, small flat washer, and lock washers. Go through the base, down through the caster, and then the nut, and that's a 10mm nut, Phillips or flathead screwdriver for the screw head. And all the way through this video, I'm going to start off normal speed, but since a lot of things we have to do more than once, I'll speed it up through the rest. So it's still the full assembly, but not quite as long as it actually took. And I go through and put all these on, and when I get them all on, then I'll come through and tighten them. And here are my helpers. Caleb's going to do his speed assembly for this one. All four of these wheels are the same. Bolt, lock washer, small flat washer, through the base, through the caster, and then the nut. Now John's going to have his turn with his wheel. And this is really something for them because they were out playing soccer when they saw me starting on this and decided they wanted to help. That one done. Now we go a little bit faster to get through this one. And they're back off playing soccer. Okay, now for the next section, I mistakenly used the larger flat washers to attach the collector supports to the base. Shown here are the two sizes. Use the smaller of the two. After all said and done, I do go back off camera and switch the washers. And here's the 6 14mm bolts, lock washers, and use the small flat washers. Here are the three collector supports that we'll be attaching to the base. And here's a separate view, notice that one end is bent to the side. The supports need to be installed such that the end bends toward the collector. Also note some of these ends may not be in line with the support. The ones I have were bent back away from the collector. This is only an issue on the one support through which the filter bag support is bolted, but that's another step, just be aware. Here I am installing the collector supports. Note the direction for the top does matter. They should all have the Z angle pointed in toward the center. The bolt goes through the lock washer, then the flat washer, and is tightened against the nut that's welded under the base. And as we've got 6 of these bolts to do, we'll start speeding up here in a minute. One down. There's 2, and as we go into 3, you'll notice that I do use a combination of sockets and wrenches. The way some of these holes are, it makes it difficult to try and get a good feel for it. And here's a view of after the collector supports have been attached to the base. Now it's time to bolt the motor base to the base plate. Here's the direction the motor base needs to be. To bolt the motor base to the base plate, we'll use a 14mm bolt, lock washer, and small flat washer. Just line up the holes, thread the bolts through the holes into the nuts welded under the base plate. Just don't tighten any of these bolts just yet. And since I got the first one done, I seem to have picked up speed again, so we can get through these other 3. I'll go ahead and tighten these up just a little bit. Get ready to do the motor and the fan housing. Line the fan housing up. We use a 14mm bolt, lock washer, and a large flat washer for these, and just thread these into the nut welded under the base plate. We're not going to tighten these until we get done with the motor. One on each side. Then we'll move on to bolt the motor to the motor base. With the fan housing loose like this, lining the motor up should be pretty easy. Now to bolt the motor to the motor base, we'll use a 14mm bolt, large flat washer, put those in from the top, and on the bottom we'll have a flat washer, a lock washer, and a 14mm nut to secure it. We won't tighten any of these up until we've got them all in. Now that they're all in, we'll go through and tighten them all up. Next we'll be installing the outlet and the outlet gasket to the fan housing. This uses a 6 flange bolts and the nylon lock nuts. Both of these are 10 millimeter. And place the outlet gasket on the fan housing, then place the outlet on top of the outlet gasket, and then secure the outlet to the fan housing with the 6 bolts and the 6 nuts. Securing the nuts can be challenging depending on the clearance your fan housing has with the nut, and I ended up going with an open-end wrench at kind of at an angle to tighten it up. We'll hurry and speed up tightening these up. Next we'll be using these 14 millimeter bolts, lock washers, and the small flat washers. Here are the collector supports. Note they're all facing inward. Attach the collector to the 2 supports away from the furthest away from the motor. And it may be easier to put 1 bolt, lock washer, and flat washer per support, and then follow it up with the second. If you've got a helper, this could be a little easier, but make sure when you're lowering the connector in here that it's on the inside of all 3 of the collector supports. The collector support nearest the motor is the support that will have the filter bag support bolted with the collector support into the collector. Here I am going back through, putting the second bolt in. This is the collector support. You see me attaching the filter support with the bolt going through it, then the collector support into the collector. If necessary, you can either bend the end of this support straighter or tighten one of the bolts with a lock washer attached to pre-flatten it a bit, which can give you a little more clearance. No nuts necessary for any of these as they tighten into the collector. And we just go back through and tighten all 6 of these bolts. And there we go. Next we'll be installing the handle, and it's the 2 black hex bolts and 2 14 millimeter nuts. The bolts go through the handle, just slide into the collector, and then from the inside go through the bottom, and the nut can be tightened to secure the handle. And that's a horrible shot, but it's really just putting the nut on the bolts. And then we'll come back through and tighten it up. Next we're going to be connecting the supplied hose to the fan outlet and the collector inlet using the supplied hose clamps. To make attaching this hose easier, loosen the hose clamps as much as possible if they aren't already. Slide it over the end of the hose, and I found that angling the hose against one side of the opening and pulling the other end so it flares outward as you push the hose over the opening. Makes this step a whole lot easier than just trying to go straight down. And here I am bending that hose. It's a flex hose, but it is not as flexible or as easy to flex as the ones that will lead out from the dust collector. But the same process goes here. Just put the hose clamp over it, angle it, kind of flare out the end. It slides right over. I'll go back and tighten up the hose clamps. Now we're going to attach the filter bag to the filter support, hook the loop at the top of the filter bag to the hook on the top of the filter support. Then using one of the provided band clamps, you just slide the filter bag over the collector and secure the clamp around it. If you have a helper that isn't playing soccer, this would be a good time to use them again. We'll repeat the same thing with the collector bag. Open the bag using the attached clips. Just pull a clip away from the collector just a little bit so you can push the collector bag up under it, and repeat it with the other two clips. And if you're like me, it'll pull off anyway, but that does make securing the collector bag a little easier. You have to thread the band clamp between the collector supports and the collector bag. And then tighten the band clamp to secure the collector bag to the collector. You don't want this too tight so that it bends the collector, but you want it tight enough so that the bag will hold securely. Plug it in and power it up, and it works pretty well. Now for the final piece, although it's not necessary, if you want to attach the Y connector to the fan inlet, you just remove the screw from the fan inlet, slide the Y connector over it until the hole in the Y connector lines up with the hole in the fan inlet, replace the screw, and tighten it up. It has a cap for one end, and it's a good idea to have either this cap closed or the gate closed up next to the dust collector to increase suction on the other end. And that wraps this one up. Thank you for watching.